The cemetery was quiet, as it always was. The morning sun cast long shadows over the rows of gravestones, and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and fresh flowers. Alessia knelt by her husband's grave, her hands trembling as she brushed away the fallen leaves and wiped the dust from the cold stone. It had been months since he passed, but the pain still felt raw, like an open wound that refused to heal. Every visit to the cemetery was a battle between holding on and letting go. She placed a single white rose on the grave, her fingers lingering on the engraved letters of his name. "I miss you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Every day I miss you." As she stood to leave, a sound broke the silence, a faint, whimpering cry. Alessia froze, her heart skipping a beat. She turned her head, scanning the rows of graves. The cry came again, louder this time, more desperate. It wasn't the wind or the rustling of leaves. It was a child. Her feet moved before her mind could catch up. She followed the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. The cries led her to a small, neglected corner of the cemetery, where the grass grew wild and the gravestones were cracked and forgotten. There, nestled among the overgrown weeds, was a bundle of blankets. Alessia's breath caught in her throat. She knelt down, her hands shaking as she reached for the bundle. The cries grew louder, more urgent. She carefully pulled back the blanket, and there, staring up at her with wide, tear-filled eyes, was a baby. The child's face was red from crying, her tiny fists clenched tightly. She couldn't have been more than a few months old. Alessia's mind raced. Who would leave a baby here? Why? She looked around, but the cemetery was empty. There was no one in sight. Without thinking, she scooped the baby into her arms, cradling her close. The child's cries softened, her tiny body trembling against Alessia's chest. "Shh, it's okay," Alessia whispered, her voice trembling. "You're safe now, I've got you." As she held the baby, something inside her shifted. The weight of her grief, the heaviness that had consumed her for months, seemed to lift just a little. In that moment, she knew she couldn't leave this child here. She couldn't walk away. But what would she do? She wasn't prepared for this. She had no idea how to care for a baby. Yet as she looked down at the child's tear-streaked face, she felt a surge of determination. This baby needed her, and maybe, just maybe, she needed this baby too. Alessia hurried out of the cemetery, the baby clutched tightly in her arms. The child had stopped crying, her tiny face now peaceful as she nestled against Alessia's chest. The warmth of the baby's body against hers felt strange, yet comforting, like a spark of life in the midst of her grief. She reached her car and carefully placed the baby in the passenger seat, using the blanket to cushion her. Her hands were still shaking as she started the engine, her mind racing with questions. Who was this child? Where had she come from? And why had she been left in such a desolate place? As she drove, Alessia glanced at the baby, who was now sleeping soundly. The sight of the child's innocent face stirred something deep within her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was a mix of protectiveness, love, and a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in months, she felt like she had a reason to keep going. When she arrived home, Alessia carried the baby inside, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. She laid the child gently on the couch and quickly gathered whatever she could find to make her comfortable. A soft towel, a small pillow, and a warm blanket. She didn't have any baby supplies, but she would figure it out. She had to. The baby stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Alessia knelt beside her, her voice soft and soothing. "It's okay, little one. You're safe now." She reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from the baby's forehead. The child looked up at her, her eyes wide and trusting. Alessia's heart swelled with emotion. She didn't know how or why this baby had come into her life, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let her go. This child needed her, and in some strange way, Alessia needed her too. Over the next few hours, Alessia did everything she could to care for the baby. She warmed some milk and fed her with a small spoon, laughing softly as the child made a mess. She changed her makeshift diaper using a clean towel, her hands clumsy but gentle. And as she held the baby in her arms, rocking her to sleep, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. But as the day turned to night, reality began to set in. Alessia knew she couldn't keep the baby without answers. She needed to find out where she had come from, and if anyone was looking for her. The thought of losing the child already filled her with a deep, aching fear, but she knew she had to do the right thing. The next morning, Alessia called the local police station. Her voice trembled as she explained what had happened, her eyes never leaving the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. The officer on the other end of the line listened carefully, his tone calm and reassuring. "We'll send someone over to take a statement," he said, "and we'll start looking into any reports of a missing child. In the meantime, thank you for taking care of her." Alessia hung up the phone, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She would fight for this child. No matter what it took, she would make sure the baby was safe and loved. The police arrived later that morning, their presence filling Alessia's small home with an air of formality that made her nervous. Two officers, a man and a woman, introduced themselves and began asking questions. Alessia answered as best she could, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I found her in the cemetery," she explained, her arms wrapped protectively around the baby, who was now awake and curiously observing the strangers. "She was wrapped in a blanket, just lying there. I couldn't leave her." The female officer, Officer Martinez, nodded sympathetically. "You did the right thing," she said, her tone kind. "We'll need to take the baby to the hospital for a checkup, just to make sure she's healthy. And we'll start looking into any missing persons reports that might match her description." Alessia's heart sank at the thought of letting the baby go, even for a short time. "Can I come with her?" she asked, her voice pleading. "I don't want her to be alone." Officer Martinez exchanged a glance with her partner before nodding. "Of course. We'll take you both to the hospital." At the hospital, the baby was examined by a kind-faced pediatrician who assured Alessia that the child was healthy and well cared for. "She's a little underweight, but otherwise she's in good condition," the doctor said. "Whoever had her before must have taken care of her, at least for a while." Alessia felt a mix of relief and confusion. If someone had cared for this baby, why had they abandoned her? The question gnawed at her as she held the child close, her fingers gently stroking the baby's soft cheek. Over the next few days, the police worked to uncover the truth. They checked databases, interviewed people in the area, and even searched the cemetery for clues. But no one came forward to claim the baby, and no missing persons reports matched her description. It was as if she had appeared out of nowhere. Alessia, meanwhile, found herself growing more attached to the child with each passing day. She named her Mia, after her late husband's favorite song. The name felt right, like it had always belonged to her. Mia became her constant companion, her tiny presence filling the empty spaces in Alessia's heart. But as the days turned into weeks, the reality of the situation became impossible to ignore. Mia wasn't hers, not legally at least, and if no one came forward to claim her, the child would likely be placed in foster care or put up for adoption. The thought of losing Mia was unbearable. Alessia had already lost so much. She couldn't bear to lose this little girl who had brought light back into her life. She knew what she had to do. One evening, as she rocked Mia to sleep, Alessia made a decision. She would fight for her. She would prove that she could be the mother Mia needed, even if they weren't connected by blood. It wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to try. The next morning, Alessia called a lawyer. Her voice was firm as she explained her situation. "I want to adopt her," she said. "I know it's complicated, but I'll do whatever it takes." The lawyer, a woman named Claire, listened carefully before responding. "It won't be easy," she warned. "The courts will want to explore all options before granting custody to someone who isn't a biological relative. But if you're serious about this, I'll help you fight." Alessia took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "I'm serious," she said. "Mia belongs with me. I'll do whatever it takes to make that happen." The legal process was daunting, but Alessia was determined. With Claire's guidance, she began the long and complicated journey to adopt Mia. The first step was to file a petition for custody, which required her to prove that she could provide a stable and loving home for the child. Alessia threw herself into the task, gathering documents, writing statements, and preparing for the court hearings. She spent hours researching parenting techniques, baby-proofing her home, and even attending parenting classes. She wanted to show the court that she was serious, that she was willing to do whatever it took to be the best mother she could be. But the road ahead was far from smooth. The court appointed a social worker to evaluate Alessia's home and her ability to care for Mia. The social worker, a stern woman named Mrs. Thompson, arrived one afternoon to conduct the assessment. Alessia greeted her at the door, her heart pounding with anxiety. She had spent days cleaning and organizing her home, making sure everything was perfect. Mia, now a few months older, was dressed in a cute little outfit, her cheeks rosy and her eyes bright. Mrs. Thompson walked through the house, her expression unreadable as she took notes. She asked Alessia a series of questions about her income, her support system, her reasons for wanting to adopt Mia. Alessia answered honestly, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I know I'm not her biological mother," she said, her eyes filled with emotion, "but I love her as if she were my own. She's brought so much joy into my life, and I want to give her the best future possible." Mrs. Thompson nodded, her expression softening slightly. "It's clear that you care deeply for her," she said, "but the court will need to consider all factors before making a decision. This process can take time, and there are no guarantees." Alessia understood, but she refused to let the uncertainty deter her. She continued to fight, attending court hearings and meeting with lawyers. The legal battles were exhausting, both emotionally and financially, but she pressed on, driven by her love for Mia. Meanwhile, Mia was thriving under Alessia's care. She had grown into a happy, curious baby, her laughter filling the house with warmth. Alessia cherished every moment with her, from the early morning feedings to the late-night cuddles. Mia had become her reason to keep going, her source of strength and hope. But as the months passed, the strain began to take its toll. Alessia's savings were dwindling, and the stress of the legal process weighed heavily on her. There were moments when she doubted herself, when she wondered if she was strong enough to see this through. One evening, after a particularly difficult court hearing, Alessia sat on the couch with Mia in her arms. The baby looked up at her, her tiny hand reaching out to touch Alessia's face. In that moment, all of Alessia's doubts melted away. She knew she couldn't give up, not on Mia and not on herself. "We're in this together, little one," she whispered, pressing a kiss to Mia's forehead. "No matter what happens, I'll always fight for you." Just when Alessia thought the legal battle couldn't get more complicated, a shocking twist emerged. One afternoon, as she was preparing lunch for Mia, her phone rang. It was Claire, her lawyer, and her tone was urgent. "Alessia, we need to talk," Claire said. "There's been a development in the case." Alessia's heart sank. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Claire hesitated before responding. "A woman has come forward claiming to be Mia's biological mother. She's filed a petition to regain custody." The words hit Alessia like a punch to the gut. She sank into a chair, her mind racing. Mia's biological mother? After all this time? She had assumed Mia had been abandoned, that no one wanted her. But now everything was uncertain. "What does this mean?" Alessia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means the case just got a lot more complicated," Claire replied. "The court will have to consider her claim, and if she can prove she's Mia's mother, she'll have a strong case for custody." Alessia felt a wave of panic wash over her. She couldn't lose Mia. Not now, not after everything they'd been through. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice desperate. "We'll fight it," Claire said firmly. "But we need to be prepared. The court will want to hear both sides, and will need to prove that it's in Mia's best interest to stay with you." The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Alessia met with Claire to prepare for the upcoming court hearing, her mind filled with fear and uncertainty. She couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had come forward. Who was she? Why had she abandoned Mia? And why was she coming back now? The answers came sooner than she expected. At the court hearing, Alessia came face to face with Mia's biological mother for the first time. The woman, named Elena, was young and visibly nervous. She spoke softly as she explained her story to the judge. "I was in a bad place when Mia was born," Elena said, her voice trembling. "I was struggling with addiction, and I couldn't take care of her. I thought leaving her in the cemetery was the only way she'd be found and taken care of. But I've turned my life around since then. I've been clean for 6 months, and I want to be a mother to my daughter." Alessia listened, her heart breaking as she realized the complexity of the situation. Elena's story was heartbreaking, and part of her felt sympathy for the woman. But another part of her was filled with fear. Fear of losing Mia, fear of the future. When it was her turn to speak, Alessia stood before the judge, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Your Honor, I understand that Elena is Mia's biological mother, and I respect her journey. But Mia is my daughter in every way that matters. I've been her mother since the day I found her, and I've loved her and cared for her as my own. She's happy and thriving with me, and I believe it's in her best interest to stay in the home she knows. The judge listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. This is a difficult case, he said. Both parties clearly care for the child, but the court's priority is Mia's well-being. I'll need time to review the evidence and make a decision. As Alicia left the courtroom that day, her heart was heavy with uncertainty. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never stop fighting for Mia. The days following the court hearing were agonizing for Alessia. Every moment felt like an eternity as she waited for the judge's decision. She tried to stay strong for Mia, but the weight of uncertainty was crushing. She couldn't imagine her life without the little girl who had become her whole world. Mia, oblivious to the turmoil around her, continued to bring joy to Alessia's life. Her laughter was a constant reminder of why Alessia was fighting so hard. But as the days turned into weeks, the strain began to show. Alessia's sleep was restless, her appetite diminished, and her mind was constantly preoccupied with thoughts of the impending decision. Finally, the day arrived. Alessia stood outside the courtroom, her heart pounding as she clutched Mia's tiny hand. Claire was by her side, offering words of encouragement, but nothing could calm the storm of emotions inside Alessia. Inside the courtroom, the judge's voice was calm and measured as he delivered his decision. This is a deeply emotional and complex case, he began. Both parties have demonstrated love and concern for the child, and it's clear that Mia has been well cared for by Alessia. However, the law prioritizes the rights of biological parents when they are fit to care for their child. Alessia's breath caught in her throat. She felt as though the ground was slipping out from under her. Elena has shown significant progress in her life, and the judge continued. She has completed rehabilitation, secured stable housing, and demonstrated a commitment to providing a safe and loving environment for Mia. Therefore, I am granting custody of Mia to her biological mother, effective immediately. The words hit Alessia like a tidal wave. She felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. Her grip on Mia's hand tightened instinctively, as if she could somehow hold on to her forever. Elena, seated across the room, burst into tears of relief. But for Alessia, the tears that came were ones of heartbreak. She knelt down and pulled Mia into her arms, holding her tightly as sobs racked her body. I love you, Mia, she whispered, her voice breaking. No matter what happens, I'll always love you. Claire placed a comforting hand on Alessia's shoulder, but there was little she could say to ease the pain. The judge had made his decision, and there was no appeal. The next few days were a blur. Alessia packed Mia's belongings, her hands trembling as she folded the tiny clothes and packed the toys they had shared. She tried to memorize every detail of Mia's face, every sound of her laughter, every moment they had left together. When the day came for Mia to leave, Alessia felt as though her heart was being ripped out. She handed Mia over to Elena, her arms feeling empty and cold the moment the child was no longer in them. Take care of her, Alessia said, her voice barely above a whisper. She's the most precious thing in the world. Elena nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude and guilt. I will, she promised, and thank you for everything you've done for her. As Alessia watched Elena carry Mia away, she felt a piece of herself leave with them. The house, once filled with laughter and light, now felt empty and silent. She sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face as the reality of her loss set in. The days after Mia left were the hardest of Alessia's life. The silence in the house was deafening, a constant reminder of the void left behind. She wandered from room to room, her mind replaying memories of Mia's laughter, her tiny hands reaching out, in the way she had filled Alessia's life with purpose. But as the weeks passed, something began to shift. Alessia's grief, though still raw, started to transform. She realized that Mia had given her something invaluable, a reason to live, to love, and to hope again. The little girl had taught her that even in the darkest moments, light could find its way in. One morning, as Alessia sat by the window with a cup of tea, she made a decision. She couldn't let her pain define her. She would honor Mia's memory by continuing to spread the love and kindness that the child had brought into her life. She began volunteering at a local shelter for women and children, offering support to those who had faced loss and hardship. It was there that she met Sophia, a young mother struggling to rebuild her life after escaping an abusive relationship. Sophia's daughter, Lucia, was just a few months older than Mia had been, and the sight of her brought both joy and bittersweet memories to Alessia. Over time, Alessia formed a bond with Sophia and Lucia. She helped Sophia find resources, offered her a listening ear, and even babysat Lucia when Sophia needed a break. The connection wasn't the same as the one she had shared with Mia, but it was meaningful in its own way. It reminded Alessia that love and family could take many forms. One evening, as Alessia rocked Lucia to sleep, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. She realized that while she would always carry Mia in her heart, her journey wasn't over. There were still people who needed her, still loved to give and receive. Months later, Alessia received a letter in the mail. It was from Elena. Her hands trembled as she opened it, unsure of what to expect. Inside was a heartfelt note and a photograph of Mia, now a toddler, smiling brightly. "Dear Alessia," the letter began, "I can never thank you enough for what you did for Mia. You saved her life and gave her the love she needed when I couldn't. She's thriving now, and I want you to know that she'll always know about you, about the woman who loved her so deeply. If you're willing, I'd like to stay in touch. Mia deserves to know the incredible person who was her first mother." Tears streamed down Alessia's face as she read the words. She clutched the photograph to her chest, feeling a mix of emotions, joy, sorrow, and hope. It wasn't the ending she had imagined, but it was a new beginning. She wrote back to Elena, expressing her gratitude and agreeing to stay in touch. Over time, they formed an unexpected bond, united by their love for Mia. Alessia even got to visit Mia occasionally, watching her grow from afar and knowing that she had played a part in shaping the little girl's life. As Alessia stood in her garden one sunny afternoon, she realized that life had come full circle. She had lost so much, but she had also gained so much: strength, resilience, and the ability to love again. Mia had been her miracle, and though their time together had been short, it had changed her forever. And so Alessia moved forward, carrying the lessons of love, loss, and second chances with her. She knew that her story wasn't over. It was simply a new chapter, filled with endless possibilities.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.